By the time this story picks up again, Egypt has already survived its greatest shock. The Hyksos are gone, their capital at Avaris has fallen, and their last stronghold in Canaan has been ground down after years of siege. Nubia to the south is no longer a dangerous neighbor, but a conquered land, its gold and stone flowing steadily north. Egypt has an army that has learned to win the hard way, and a royal house that was forged in war. This is the moment most people imagine when they hear the words Pharaoh of the New Kingdom. Temples rise at Thebes. The god Amun is merging with Ra into a supreme Amun-Ra, and Egypt is starting to think not in terms of survival, but in terms of empire. The question is no longer, will Egypt live, but how far can Egypt go? In this episode, the focus shifts to the first great double act of the 18th dynasty, a queen who rules like a king and covers the cliffs of Thebes with her monuments, and a warrior pharaoh who turns Egypt into a superpower on the battlefields of Syria and Canaan. This is the age of Hatshepsut and Thutmose III. After the shock and rebuilding, the new kingdom opens with a very unusual balance of power at the top. Egypt is strong, rich, and armed, but the person holding the reins is not a classic warrior king. It is a woman who slowly turns herself into one. Thutmose II dies, leaving a very young heir, Thutmose III, born to a secondary wife. His stepmother, Hatshepsut, begins in a familiar role, the respectable regent who rules for the child king until he grows up. For a few years, she behaves exactly as tradition expects, naming Thutmose III first, standing behind him in official scenes, and presenting herself as the guardian of his throne. Then she does something no one really expects. Instead of stepping back as the boy matures, Hatshepsut steps forward. She takes on the full titulary of a pharaoh, has herself crowned as king, and rules as senior co-ruler alongside Thutmose III, not instead of him. On temple walls, she appears in a king's kilt and crown, even with the ritual false beard, while inscriptions explain that Amun himself chose her and that royal blood runs pure through her line. Egypt, which once struggled to accept foreign Hyksos kings, now watches a native queen carefully rewrite the rules from within. Hatshepsut's Egypt does not charge across the map the way later New Kingdom pharaohs will. Instead, her reign feels like a deep breath after decades of war. Armies still move, Nubia is kept in line, border fortresses are manned, but the big stories are about building, trade, and image. She pours resources into temples for Amun at Karnak, and above all into her terraced mortuary temple at Deir el-Bakri, a series of colonnaded platforms rising like a stone theater out of the cliffs on the west bank of Thebes. On its walls, Hatshepsut has her life and ideology carved in careful detail, her divine birth from Amun, her right to rule, and peaceful triumphs like the famous expedition to Punt, a mysterious land somewhere along the Red Sea or Horn of Africa. Ships sail there for incense, myrrh trees, exotic animals, and luxury goods, then come back to Thebes in long carved processions. It is propaganda, of course, but of a very specific kind. Where other pharaohs boast about piles of enemy hands, Hatshepsut boasts about terraces, trade routes, and a god who, as the inscriptions insist, wanted a woman on the throne. While Hatshepsut shapes Egypt's image as a pious, prosperous kingdom, the boy she once ruled for is growing up in the background. Thutmose III spends these years learning to be exactly the kind of king the new kingdom now expects: a commander, a charioteer, a man whose legitimacy will be proven not by terrace walls, but by enemy corpses and surrendered cities. When Hatshepsut dies, he is ready. What follows is the swing from one pole of New Kingdom power to the other. Under Thutmose III, Egypt surges out of its Nile Valley with a speed and reach no earlier pharaoh had matched. Vassal rulers in Canaan and Syria test the limits, form coalitions, and bet that the temple-building Egypt of Hatshepsut will not come north in force. Thutmose III answers them at Megiddo, in a campaign so important that his scribes carve the details into stone, the first fully recorded battle in history, and the moment when Egypt stops being just a great kingdom and becomes an empire. The Megiddo campaign shows exactly what kind of king Thutmose III has become. The rebel coalition blocks the roads with 3 possible approaches to the city.
His generals beg him to take the wide, safe routes. Scouts warn that the narrow Aruna Pass could be a death trap if the enemy is waiting at the exit. Thutmose does the opposite of what everyone expects. He takes the army single file through the gorge, gambles that his enemies will assume he is too cautious to try it, and bursts out onto the plain in a place they have left almost undefended. The battle that follows is messy and very human. Egyptian troops win the field, but many of them stop to loot the abandoned camp instead of chasing the fleeing enemy into Megiddo. Thutmose has to settle for a siege. He has his men dig a moat and build a wooden palisade around the city, slowly starving it out. It takes months, but in the end, the rebel princes come crawling out, surrender their horses and chariots, and hand over their sons as hostages. Megiddo does not just fall, it becomes a lesson written into stone. This is what happens to those who gamble against the new kingdom. From that point on, Thutmose III does not stop. Over the course of roughly 17 campaigns, he turned Syria and Canaan into an Egyptian sphere of influence, pushing as far north as the Euphrates and taking tribute from cities that once looked only to Mitanni or other great powers. Egypt does not annex everything directly. Instead, it builds a web of loyal, or at least obedient, vassal princes, garrisons key ports and fortresses, and watches the trade routes that carry timber, metals, and luxury goods. By the height of his reign, an Egyptian scribe can boast that the borders of Egypt run from the cataracts in the south to the river that turns back in the north, from deep in Nubia up to the strange reversed waters of the Euphrates. For a civilization that once huddled safely in its Nile Valley, terrified by the shock of Hyksos chariots, this is a complete transformation, from an inward-looking kingdom to an empire whose kings assume that war, tribute, and foreign diplomacy are just part of the job description. By the mid-18th dynasty, all of this is more than just a string of victories. It has hardened into an ideology. The wealth pouring in from Nubia and Asia is framed as proof that Amun-Ra favors Egypt, and the pharaoh is shown in temple reliefs as a divine warrior, smiting bound foreigners, trampling enemies, and personally handing conquered cities to the god. At Karnak, Thutmose III has his campaigns carved into walls and pylons, long lists of captured towns and tribute that turn geography into a trophy cabinet. Behind the images is a new normal. New Kingdom Egypt is no longer the closed, river-shaped world of the Old Kingdom. It is a state that expects to manage vassals, negotiate with rival empires, send letters and princesses abroad, and answer rebellion with one more campaign season in Syria or Nubia. The shock of the Hyksos has been fully processed into policy. Never again wait for chaos to arrive at your borders if you can ride out to meet it first. After Thutmose III, the machinery of empire keeps running, but the way pharaohs use it slowly changes. His son, Amenhotep II, still fits the warrior king ideal. Later tales praise his strength, his archery, his chariot skills, and he continues campaigns in Syria and Nubia to remind vassals who is in charge. But by the time of Thutmose IV, and especially Amenhotep III, another tool starts to matter just as much as chariots: diplomacy. Marriages, gifts of gold, and long-distance letters begin to do part of the work that armies once did alone. All of this comes into sharp focus under Amenhotep III, sometimes called the Pharaoh of diplomacy. He inherits a stable empire and chooses not to spend his reign chasing battles up and down Syria. Instead, he behaves like a king who knows everyone else needs him more than he needs them. He builds on a grand scale inside Egypt. While abroad, he trades daughters, letters, and above all, gold for peace and prestige. In the international correspondence, later known as the Amarna letters, foreign rulers address the king of Egypt as brother and compete for his attention. Kings of Babylon, Mitanni, and other great states send their princesses to marry Amenhotep III, and in return they beg, sometimes almost shamelessly, for more shipments of Egyptian gold. One complains that in Egypt, gold is as plentiful as dust, so surely the pharaoh can send a bit more as a sign of love.
Egypt, which once scrabbled for survival between famine and invasion, now sits at the center of a late Bronze Age club of great powers, buying stability abroad with the very metal its armies once went south to seize. By the end of Amenhotep III's reign, Egypt has come an almost impossible distance. It has gone from a traumatized kingdom robbed by foreign rulers to a state whose gold bankrolls half the diplomatic gifts of the late Bronze Age, whose temples dominate the Nile skyline, and whose kings are treated as brothers by the other great powers of their world. At the same time, that success carries its own risks. A pharaoh who barely needs to fight, a court wrapped in luxury, a religion slowly tilting towards the sun's blinding disk. All of this makes Egypt feel powerful and unshakable, but also a little less grounded than in the days when survival depended on the spear and the chariot. The empire stands at its brightest, and without realizing it yet, at the edge of a new kind of storm.
If the early New Kingdom is the story of how Egypt learned to fight, and the age of Thutmose III and Amenhotep III is the story of how it learned to rule an empire, then the next chapter will be about something stranger. What happens when a king decides to rewrite the rules of religion itself? In the following episode, the focus will be on Akhenaten, the Amarna period, and how one pharaoh's experiment nearly cracked this golden world in half, before Egypt, once again, found a way to pull itself back together.